you all for being here. My name is Andrew Glass Hastings. I'm the executive director of the Open Mobility Foundation. We're a global nonprofit public-private partnership that brings together cities, transportation technology companies, mobility operators to co-create open source data standards that cities use to manage shared mobility and public space. And it's my pleasure to be joined by this fine panel here, and including well, right here next to me is Anna Roach, the Executive Director and CEO of the Atlanta Regional Council. We have Bryan Ovalle, who's the CEO of Hello Llama AI. To his right, Thibault Castagne, the CEO of Villanova. And then to Thibault's right is Professor Jiaqi, the Director of the FHWA New Mobility Center of Excellence and UCLA Mobility Lab. All right, welcome all. So, I am married to a statistician, and maybe I know, right? Maybe I married her because I love stats, but she taught me very quickly that stats are easy to manipulate and easy to tell the story that you want to tell, and not necessarily the story that the numbers truly tell. So when I was geeking out on some of the stats around road safety, and there are many, I wanted to highlight a few and let you come to the conclusion of what these stats are telling you at the outset of this conversation, before I let our panelists get into more about the important work they do on this topic. So the first stat some of these may not be surprising. Some of them may be more so. So vehicle crashes continue to be the leading cause of death for people ages 1 to 54 in the United States. There are 43,000 vehicle crashes annually in the U.S., but there are fatal crashes in the U.S., 43,000. There are 6 million police-reported crashes, more than 11 every minute, and that's just the police-reported crashes. But even though there are 6 million police-reported crashes and there are 43 fatal crashes, the deadly crash rate is less than 1%. So of all those crashes, less than 1% of them are resulting in a death. Between 2018 and 2022, deadly crashes increased 15% in this country. 2018 to 2022, 15% increase. But perhaps there's a bright spot. So 14.3 vehicle deaths per 100,000 people. That's the current rate. 14.3 vehicle deaths per 100,000 people. That's a 54% improvement over 1937. In 1937 in the US, there were 30.8 deaths per 100,000 people. So to a certain extent, if you look at the stats one way, we're getting better. But I wanted to ask a question. I want to ask a question of the audience just to start off. So what do you think, in which city do you think you are most likely to get in a crash? In which city in the US are you most likely to get in a crash? Just yell out a city that you think. LA? Houston? Dallas? New York? DC? Miami? Okay, these are good. These are some good and some probably reasonable options.
Are these absolute numbers, or are they?
All right, we're not going to qualify. We're just going on no qualify. So the city in the U.S. that you're most likely to get in a crash, and not any kind of crash, is actually Atlanta, and Los Angeles ranks number 10, believe it or not. And so I found those stats really interesting. Okay, so enough about the stats. What I want to do is I want to ask each of you to give a little bit of an assessment of how you think we're doing, and tell us like a little bit of a reality check here. Like, how are we doing in cities in our regions? And also tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do and your relationship to this topic. Anna, can we start with you?
Absolutely, thank you. And he did that just to pick on me. So my name is Anna Roach. I am the executive director of the Atlanta Regional Commission. I don't want to talk about myself much, but had a great career. This is a fantastic role that I am in right now. And this is one of the things that are top of mind for us at the Atlanta Regional Commission. How are we doing? Well, we don't necessarily at ARC focus in on how our individual cities are doing. So I'll provide what we have as a regional perspective. However you slice the data, whether you look at it by city, by region, it's pretty daunting where we are in terms of roadway fatalities as well as roadway serious injuries. If you look at the last 10 years in the metro Atlanta region, our average deaths on an annual basis is about 600, and our annual serious injuries are at 3,000. And if you compare that year over year, the reason why I'm so troubled is because if you look at just at 2021, that number for deaths is close to 900, and the number for serious injuries is pushing 4,500, close to 5,000. So overall, we're seeing a lower number. If you look at the more earlier years, we're seeing much more troubling numbers. So how are we doing as a region? I don't think I would give us a great grade on this, but we at the Atlanta Regional Commission just completed our long-range regional safety strategy, and it was adopted by the board at the end of 2022. And so we are on the way to a new mode of thinking and some new ideas about how we're going to tackle this, but we don't have a good news story here.
Bryan.
Hi, I'm Bryan Ovalle. I'm co-founder and CEO of Llama AI. If you don't know Llama, we do low-cost sensor fusion technology to prevent collisions and record safety data for smaller than car vehicles. In terms of how we're doing, I think that there's a lot of innovation happening in the private space that could be very helpful and transformative to help the cause. I think that there's a lot of coordination that is required, and we have to look at the problem like holistically. You know, I think over-focusing or micro-focusing on just one element of the issue is going to be troublesome and problematic. Like example, like if we're not talking about land use, but we're talking about improving transportation, it's really tough, right? Like you need to really look at the whole system. So it makes it more complex, it makes it more cumbersome and slower to evolve, but that doesn't mean that it can't be done. We have to get the right people around the right conversation and really be very deliberate about our actions, because everything is required. Action is required for anything to actually happen. In terms of how it relates to our work, so there's a lot of statistics around car safety, and we basically exist because we want to bring non-car safety out of the shadows. Vulnerable road users, bikes, scooters, and anyone that's not in a car is not typically captured digitally. As all this data is being collected and as policy decisions and other kinds of planning is being decided on, these people are not getting the appropriate weight and consideration that's required for the decision making of policymakers. And so at Llama, we're focused on non-car safety data and collecting and sharing that, but also providing real-time safety to riders. So we want to prevent accidents, and at the same time, we want to improve the way that we build transit across the world.
Great. All right. Thibault?
So hi everyone. I'm Thibault Castagne. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Villanova. So Villanova, it's not Villanova, which is I think which probably is a Spanish city, or I don't know. It's Villanova, which is a Latin word for new ways, new roads. Basically, we specialize in mobility data analytics with a mission to leverage data to accelerate sustainable mobility. We came from the shared mobility management world, working now over like 60 cities to provide insights and analytics to accelerate transition towards low emission mobility. Sort of naturally, like we got into road safety, looking at how can we actually accelerate usage of micromobility. How do we improve infrastructure to have safe infrastructure and utilizing data to build new cycling lanes in cities? And I'd like to remind actually everyone that I think that road safety is at the cornerstone of any of sort of the use cases that we've discussed at CoMotion in the last 2 days, because the perception of risk, or the actual risk for people to start walking and cycling, this is the, how do we improve safety is the biggest enabler actually of accelerating transition towards walking and cycling, and building better infrastructure utilizing data is the objective there. So to answer the question, how are we doing? To give some stats as well, so 18% increase in fatalities over the last 4 years in the US. a 50% increase in cyclist fatalities over the last 10 years in the US, 60% increase of pedestrian fatalities in the last 10 years. So what we see basically is that there is no common awareness among European and US cities that road safety, specifically for vulnerable road users, is a priority. And we see it in the US with the Vision Zero network, with the Safe Streets for All grants. So we see that there is a strong political will now to change things, and I think it has been understood also by political leaders and I guess traffic engineers in general that we have to improve road safety to make sure that we move towards like low emission mobility solutions. Yeah, that's for me.
Fantastic. Professor Ma?
Activate it first. My name is Jiaqi Ma. I am a transportation engineering professor at UCLA. I direct, as Andrew mentioned, I direct UCLA Mobility Lab, which does all the research on mobility technologies and services, try to improving the transportation mobility systems. And I particularly want to mention that I recently starting to, UCLA got awarded by Federal Highways on this Center of Excellence on New Mobility and Automated Vehicles, right? There's a little discrepancy there. But this COE, Center of Excellence, is really gonna looking at different aspects of how new mobility and how emerging technologies, mobility technologies will impact our systems from urban design, urban planning, all the way to all the engineering issues, system emissions, public health, and so on. So I want to just, because this is just established Center of Excellence, I want to put it out here, and we are going to perform a lot of research in the next couple 5 years at a minimum, right? And we will also be looking forward to work with the stakeholders in the public and, very importantly, private sectors. We deeply believe the private sector is going to be a very critical piece of future mobility technologies and services. We'll work with our public and private stakeholders to perform research. We'll also, as part of Center, we will also fund research to conduct a new mobility technology service-related research. Related to your question, back to your question, how safety is going. I'm just talking about my perspective. I've been teaching transportation safety, right, for almost 10 years. I have seen my curriculum have changed a little bit over the years. Originally, we were talking about mostly statistics, very descriptive, simple statistics. That is really, from my perspective, was not sufficient to help understanding really is there a safety problem or is there safety enhancements after you deploy some countermeasures. But over the years, the safety community has improved. They're developing new technologies. We have highway safety manual that is a very, from my perspective, is a huge improvement in our safety analysis methods. Now we are getting more data, more advanced data to looking at safety, right? For example, we have sensors at the intersections, at the freeways, smart cameras, for example, to collect more detailed data to analyze safety, not making it, the safety analysis, not just a reactive approach in the past. You have to wait like 2 years until there are like 5 different crashes to be able to do something to evaluate. But now we have more advanced data. We understand the risks at these intersections so we can act more proactively. So I've seen this trend. I've included this in my curriculum. I think, to my perspective, I'm happy to see it's been improving in the past decade.
So, Professor Mott, hitting on this, especially with this new Center of Excellence that was established and the focus on research around new mobility and emerging trends, autonomous vehicles, what do you feel you'll need in order to do the types of research in this space that you're hoping to do with a focus around safety? I gave a bunch of stats, but a lot of that is looking at just kind of traditional vehicle crashes. Now you've got this like federally funded center that's looking deeper into these new modes, and many of which are shared. So what do you need in order to be able to dig into this question of safety as it relates to new mobility and autonomous vehicles, that sort of thing?
Yeah, the safety analysis has been particularly Department of Transportation. They all have a safety department, but they, as you said, they sometimes their definition of safety is one motor vehicle got involved, right? So that's how they're defining a traditional safety program. But obviously, when we talk about safety of the entire mobility system, it's quite a different story. I'll just give you one example, right? How safety is going to be complicated. We are talking about, we have seen, Waymo is now here will be here, right, in LA, in Santa Monica, deploying pickup passengers, their kind of autonomous taxi. We heard a cruise incidents, right, in the past 1 month. We have been doing research, for example, looking at not only the functional safety of these vehicles, right, or the functional safety of the roadways, but the system safety, or we talk about operational safety when these vehicles deployed at scale, when they deliver pickup passengers, when they interact with the passengers, when this vehicle interact with their other road users, and also these automated vehicles, right, not only interacting with their immediate surrounding, they're interacting with the remote operators. They have to interact with the maintenance, right, guys. Every time before they got released to pick up deliver passengers, maintenance folks come here, ensure your sensors are well calibrated and so on. So you see that it's a system of systems. It's a huge thing, and we have to looking at the entire process to understand what might be wrong. So we have been, what are the potential risks, safety hazards, right? And then you can correspondingly deploy mitigation or even prevention strategies. So it's a kind of a complex systems, right? You have to looking at instead of just motor vehicles, right? Highways.
So the state of safety on our roadways today, I think, is pretty sobering. And Thibault, Villanova took the opportunity to interview, I think, 30 or so different cities, regional authorities, both here in the U.S. and in the EU. What did you hear in the course of those conversations about the obstacles of really addressing road safety challenges?
So I guess probably the first obstacle is the financial one. I think the financial one is the largest obstacle, because it means basically like changing infrastructure, and infrastructure is an expensive thing to change. But to come back on what was said before, I think data actually is a strong enabler here again to make sure that you actually spend budget on specific infrastructure smartly, in a smarter way, and make sure that also with the new data that you get also from connected vehicle, you can measure impact actually in a much more real-time basis over any sort of interventions that you're doing. I think the second obstacle is the political one. I don't know if you followed the news in the UK about the 20 miles per hour. So a lot of cities in the UK have implemented actually the 20 miles per hour speed limit, and then the Prime Minister Sunak mentioned that it was anti sort of British culture to set up this speed limitation in city and urban context, right? So even though at Villanova, for instance, we worked for Transport for London. So we have a huge project with Transport for London, basically working on the Vision Zero program. And the whole thing about the project was measuring actually the impact of this 20 miles per hour speed limit in the city, and seeing how actually we can collect data from connected vehicle in the Greater London to measure basically the decrease of abnormal driving events that we're seeing actually from that reduction of speed limit. And we know that the speed, to give also another statistic here, a pedestrian hit by a car at 50 km per hour has a probability of dying of 70%. If it's 30 km per hour, it drops to 10%. So basically, to come back to also what you were mentioning about the multi-factor aspect of crashes and road safety, I think the single risk factor basically is speed today, and specifically for in the collision against VRUs, vulnerable road users.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And then, of course, followed up by enforcement. It seems like EU cities have some advantages there from US cities, just in terms of some of the automating that enforcement piece. Bryan, I recently got an electric car, and it's now fully connected, and so it's producing a bunch of ADAS, ADAS data. So this advanced I just found advanced driver assistance systems. So every time the system like comes on and says automatically brakes because it thinks I'm getting too close to my neighbor's bush, then that it's sending that to the OEM and reporting an event. But when I'm riding my bike, I don't have that same system in place, and so I may be oversimplifying this, but it seems like that's a little bit what you're trying to address. That it's great to have all of this safety data coming off of connected cars and trucks, but what about all the other vehicles that are smaller than those? What's it, if in that context, what's the kind of obstacle to adopt? What's the obstacle to getting this to be more commonplace than as we're starting to see this more and more in larger vehicles?
Yeah, I would say the biggest obstacle is that people don't know it's possible on these kinds of vehicle modes. Typically, these kinds of systems have been high cost. We get questions a lot that like, do you guys use LiDAR? No, that wouldn't be appropriate for this vehicle class. So the real innovation has been in creating the capability at a cost point that is appropriate for the vehicle class. And at the cost that we are experiencing now, it's really more of probably a marketing lift in terms of letting people know. Like cities probably don't know that they could have all kinds of safety data for non-car vehicles. They don't even know that the capability exists. So like getting the word out, things like this right here, right now, super useful in terms of, again, like the technology that we want a lot of times is actually present. It's just that we don't know where it is or who to talk to. So I think pulling that together is a big lift in terms of getting the word out. But from a technological perspective, that there is no lift. Like we've done it. It is possible. And in addition to the data component, actually providing safety to the user is critical as well. Like we have lacking infrastructure. We heard the statistics that you guys have shared. Like that's there has to be multifold value to these kinds of systems in protecting people today with the current infrastructure in terms of enabling better decision makings for future infrastructure, and really complementing all of the stuff that's happening for cars and making sure that these vulnerable road users and other road users don't get left behind.
Anna, as the leader of a regional entity, the Atlanta Regional Commission, made up of a large population and multiple cities, how do you coordinate across those cities in trying to? I would imagine there's obstacles there, but also opportunity. So perhaps in that effort of working kind of across municipal boundaries, thinking about a regional approach, what are some of those obstacles and opportunities around coordination?
Well, I do think you hit on one of them, which is coordinating very diverse communities that have different priorities around safety. We do know that roadway safety impacts poor communities and Black and brown communities disparately than they do more well-resourced communities. And so getting well-resourced communities to understand that this is a regional issue, that we need to act collectively in order to be effective in addressing it, I do think that that's a challenge. But if you lift up above that, I think everybody understands that there's tremendous value to human life. Mm-hmm. And no matter where you live, when someone is injured in a vehicle or road transportation incident, I think you feel that no matter where you are. So I think it is an opportunity to bring communities together and get consensus on something that, regardless of your political leaning, it's like agnostic to that, right? So there's great opportunity there. I'd say the other obstacle is just human behavior. It's unpredictable. It's something that it's difficult to manage and measure. And I think that is the biggest headwind we face as we try to develop solutions. I mean, the things that can give us data, like cars, now like other modalities, right? Those are the easier ones to develop solutions for, but human behavior, it's more difficult. And I think the success we will see in the future is when we do a mindset shift from trying to control human behavior to try to design our safety systems to compensate for human behavior. We're going to let humans do what they do, and then we're going to design our safety and road systems to try to compensate for that. So those are some of the obstacles.
That's a great point. And I think, Thibault, you hit on one example of that, which is lowering speed limits. Another one I've read about more recently, which is not by any means a new concept, but narrower lanes save lives. Because, of course, narrower lanes force people to go slower, which then reduces the incidence of certainly fatal crashes. All right, so we're at CoMotion, which is focusing on really innovation and how do we look around the corner ahead of us to address some of these major issues like safety. So I want to spend a few minutes and hear from you about sort of what's innovating in this space. What do you see in terms of kind of new technology or innovative ideas that are coming up to help us address some of these longstanding road safety issues? The Open Mobility Foundation stewards the mobility data specification, and data specification, MDS, is used by cities around the world to manage shared mobility. And we recently had a member in Drover who contributed to that spec to help cities be able to know whether a scooter rider is on a sidewalk or on the roadway or in a bike lane. And that came from kind of a regulatory purpose, but it was actually a big innovation for cities to know who's using their infrastructure and how. So if a city makes the investment in a new bicycle lane or has just laid out a really nice new sidewalk to help protect pedestrians, but they're seeing a bunch of either scooter users not in the bike lane and instead on the sidewalk, maybe with that data, they can now have some insights into what's going on in the roadway. Kind of an example of kind of innovating in this space, almost from kind of the backdoor perspective. But ultimately, it's providing data and insights that the cities didn't have before in helping to promote different new mobility. So thinking kind of big picture here, I don't, Anna, you're next to me, but you feel free to jump in, or any of you really. We don't have to go down the line here. Innovation. What do you see, or who do you see kind of innovating in this space?
Yeah, I'm gonna be very quick so I can hear from some of my private sector partners here, because this will be a good learning for us. I mean, we don't have the answers as government agencies, right? And that's why when you approach roadway safety, you can't approach it in a bubble. You really do have to partner with the private sector to try to figure out what innovations are out there. You mean some we're already taking advantage of, like connected vehicles, but I'm wildly interested to find out how artificial intelligence and maturity in that regard will help us in terms of roadway safety. So I'm not going to say a lot. I'm going to be listening for some solutions that are coming down the pike that we might use to help us address this issue.
So just to, I think what has been interesting actually on this interview process that we did in Europe and in the US is to recognize that a lot of the transport agencies that we've interviewed have very similar road safety assessment and methodology, which most of the time actually come. Road safety is not new, and I think most of the time comes from the state level or the national level, and the methodology that is being used is something that is shared across all the cities and transport authorities, right? And it's based to 98% of the time on historical collisions and the construction of this high injury network or these black spots or hot spots that different terms in different cities. But basically relying on sort of the 5 to 10 years historical collisions and making sense of this data to actually prioritize interventions on this high injury network and report it, etc. I think the new change of paradigm here is, how do we, I'm not sure if everyone here is familiar with the road safety pyramid. So the road safety pyramid basically originally was created for factory safety in 1934, and actually was changed or sort of translated into traffic safety in 1969 to look at, for sort of 10 injuries, serious injuries and fatalities, you have 600 near misses and 300,000 unsafe acts on the road. And so, how do we sort of, from the data that we're collecting, which are by definition basically historical and lagging indicators, and most of the time actually quite biased, how do we complement this data with near-miss information? And sort of the rise of connectivity in vehicles, and also from the cell phone to capture basically VRU flows and density, help us basically to have a more comprehensive basically and proactive approach on road safety. And again, I mean, only on our side at Villanova, like at the moment, we have about 40 million connected vehicles basically on the platform in the US and 30 million in Europe. So this is like 100,000 of road events per day that you are collecting. And so you get, you know, all the speeding, the braking, the steering, the number of passengers, the windshield information, all sort of contextualization that you can get from the connectivity of the car. And that has a lot of value to, I believe, basically like have, yes, this more proactive, basically, safety approach, comprehensive and contextualization also of the different risk factors that can actually lead to a crash. And so I think this is where the innovation will come from. We see that there's something else in Europe called eCall. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's the automatic alert to emergency services every time there is a serious crash on a car. So talking about data sharing, it's actually already happening with the eCall. So you have that. I believe the next stage of innovation will be that sort of real-time road safety information, even cars being actually aware of VRU, especially on the blind spots for trucks and heavy-duty vehicles. You know, look with the localization of the cell phone and the telematics associated with that.
Professor Ma?
Yeah, sure. I can follow up. Actually, exactly following what you said about the data standards, and then the next with first of all, getting the people agreed on data standards itself is is a daunting task. But then after that, you need to populate those data, right? Where are those data coming from? We're talking about who are using your curbside, how pedestrians are crossing your roadways, how is there even people running red light or running yellow light all the time at this intersection, how aggressive drivers are at this intersection. It can be because of a lot of reasons. It's all about local intersection design, the side distance, the geometric design. So a lot of these people's behavior might be different from intersection to intersection. That's actually can be approved from the data we collected. But in the past, frankly, we don't have such a data. We don't even think about analyzing safety like that. But now with a lot of these smart cameras, with LiDAR sensors, all these great things that we can deploy, and these sensors are getting cheaper, right? For example, I was talking to one District 7, Caltrans District 7 manager. He's talking about they're going to replacing a lot of the old cameras with the smart cameras along one of their freeway systems. That's going to give you a lot of the data to help you to understand. So, and then obviously you will have AI in there to analyzing the video feeds and then extract information. That's critical, not just data, but extract information to inform safety. But there's one aspect of kind of traditional AI. I call it traditional AI. But now we have more powerful AI. Everybody's talking about ChatGPT these days. This generative AI language models. I think these tools will be more and more available in, like, for example, your personal phones. And then these large language vision models, these phones will help you see your surroundings, or they will receive information about your surroundings. Then they will analyze and interact with you to helping you develop the best safety strategies for you to cross the intersection, or for people. This sounds a little futuristic, but in fact not, right? If you look at how many applications after GPT-4's their developer conference last week, there's so many great applications. It will be very powerful, helping improving safety, particularly these are on personal devices. They interact with the pedestrians and other vulnerable users directly. They kind of as an extra layer of guidance and safety advisory, right?
So are you saying that before long my car is going to be able to tell me that I'm going to get in a crash before I get in the crash, or help me prevent that crash from happening? I mean, it's
they're already doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think vehicles are already doing that. I think there's tons of technology in vehicles and in applications that are already doing that. So don't tell my children this, but I've got them all on Life 360. And I can tell when my 18-year-old is doing excessive braking or is on his phone or whatever, and I get an alert every single time that happens. So, I mean, I think there's technology out there that's doing it. And it's interesting to learn from my fellow panelists that the future of road safety innovation lies really in two aspects. How do we collect and analyze the data, and artificial intelligence using that information to give us more information to make safety decisions. And then the next is in connected vehicles. And I think we're well on our way with both of those things.
Bryan?
I agree with what everyone has said. Those are exactly what I would have said in terms of data standards and expanding that to safety, then also AI and the ability to actually create insights. But one thing that I wanted to add was somewhere I'd like to see innovation is, innovation is not just on the technology and technology development. It's innovation is, how do you create new concepts to advance rapidly what you used to do? So on the public side, I'd love to see innovation in terms of how they partner with the private companies. Like if we're being asked to, hey, change the world and create something brand new, well, you can't procure things the same way you used to. You can't have short-sighted, can I implement this tomorrow? Like the way that we fund deeper technology innovation has to change, and government is there to help hedge the risk. So instead of looking for, can I implement tomorrow, you should be looking at what solutions are potentially possible in the next 3 to 5 years. How do I get on the ground floor before there's a business case where the private sector would want to fund this, and where I can hedge the risk, burn it down, and then we can get to a point where the technology you want 5, 10 years from now will exist. Yeah. I think there's a big lack of innovation on the public side in terms of how they approach partnering with private companies.
Yes, that age-old procurement challenge, and how does every innovative idea ends up dying on the vine in procurement. All right, so related to that, not everyone. Sorry, unfair. But I'm sorry, I'm biased because we're supporting this group of eight cities who are members of the OMF and All One Smart grants, and the federal government was great and created this grant program to funnel money right to cities to help them address some real existing problems. But at the same time, they didn't necessarily clear the path to help cities innovate more on procurement. And so everything just kind of grinds to a halt as soon as you get into the procurement question. But I don't want our conversation to grind to a halt in the realm of procurement. I want to ask maybe a question that, throw this out there, because we've been talking about data. We've heard a lot of different sources of data. Open question here: do we need a national road safety data standard, so that there's some kind of common language across all of this data?
I would say absolutely. If there's no data compatibility, the data doesn't matter. Like you're not going to aggregate it and then be like, oh, how do we connect all this disparate data to create an insight? You can't. Like there needs to be a data standard, 100%. We should all be speaking the same language, and it benefits everyone. So I would love to hear anyone that has like an opposition to that idea, because I would love to have a discussion about it.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I think I would just agree and double down on that. For Transport for London, actually, we used MDS and CDS. Yeah, so we used the MDS for the shared micromobility flows, and then looking at its intersection actually of risk with trucks and heavy-duty vehicle. And so we also get the data from the telematics company for the vans and the trucks, which we translated into like curb activity. Yeah. So we actually did use already like open standards, but yeah, I think the lion's share of that will be the work with automotive OEMs and making sure that they standardize the FCD, the floating car data, so that we can easily basically ingest that and provide like safety analysis. Yeah.
Yeah, it's more of a global road safety data standard, not just a national here. And I will note that on the panel, we do not have a representative from some of the more kind of institutional industries that have been selling systems and hardware to cities for a long time and may or may not agree on an open source data standard on this route. But shifting gears slightly, but still related to this. And then think if you have any questions, because I'm going to turn to the audience next. But the federal government right now, US DOT, FHWA in particular, creating the Center of Excellence, New Mobility, Autonomous Vehicles, also the Intersection Safety Challenge. You know, they just released $40 million for grants to demonstrate successful deployments of V2X technologies with a big focus on addressing safety. This seems like a lot. Is the federal government and Thibault thinking both here but also from the European perspective, is the federal government doing enough? Can they do more? Anna?
So I can jump in first on that one. I think if you look just at the dedicated funding from the federal government for safety, the answer to that is no. But I don't think any partner within the transportation ecosystem expects that as transportation leaders, we ought to rely solely on the dedicated funding for safety. Transportation funding goes to state, local, and regional governments in a swath, and there are a spectrum of priorities within that funding: operation and maintenance, expanding systems, transit and roadway, and the like. And I think it's up to departments of transportation, MPOs like mine and SCAG. SCAG is somewhere in here. Comey, are you there? By the way, we can't see y'all. So my counterpart for SCAG is here as well. And I think it's really up to us as we are allocating that funding, billions of it on an annual basis across our networks, to prioritize safety. And so, you know, the quick answer to your question is, if you look at the dedicated funding, no, it's not enough. But I think the transportation ecosystem expects that those who are allocating funding will prioritize safety. And I think if you look at it that way, I think there's never enough, but then there's a good amount of money for us to work on safety issues.
That's a great point, and it's reframing it a little bit to say, you know, we all have a role. We're not just here to, you know, get the largesse from the feds, but also use the resources that we have from even different sources to address the problem. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think the SS4A grants, I think, is a great opportunity. I mean, to what you mentioned earlier, like a lot of funding doesn't mean easy budget on the back of the city. You know, so it means like procurement is again an issue. So. You know, how do you translate this heavy funding into real budget at the bottom for people to execute on? I think that's the complexity. I think deviating a little bit from the question, I think one of the things that I would love to see, especially because when you think about our cities, and specifically in the US, I think they have been designed a lot actually with the sort of the automotive lobbying on the back, you know. Oh, yeah. And I would love to see basically how cities and governments can work more closely with OEMs and navigation system generally, because I think they're so interlinked into improving safety. On, you know, how can we do like better data sharing? How can we provide alerts, even speed enforcement of speed reduction directly in the car, as we do it for micromobility? Mm-hmm. You know, how can we advance that and have an open discussion, you know, with the larger automotive and tier 1 companies?
I just want to, at one point, I was very glad to see that this whole ARPA-I came out, because ARPA-I, you were talking about funding. You know, you don't fund something that you want tomorrow, right, or yesterday. So ARPA-I think I was participating in one of their national tours. Just to get started, they were talking about, okay, we're different from traditional funding, traditional grant. We are funding kind of high-risk project, right? But that will generate very high impacts in the future. Everybody's familiar with DARPA-I, which is the defense, right? ARPA, and IOPA, which is intelligence ARPA. This has been very successful programs. So I'm very glad to see ARPA is coming out. I hope that they're going to be as deep pockets as the ARPA ones. Yep.
One thing that I would like to add, the governments could do is also staffing their departments appropriately. It was said in an earlier session, that's another thing that's lacking. In terms of like creating funding, but also funding for the organizations that are in charge of all this responsibility. It's not an easy task. And there needs to be a reassessment on what it actually takes to get to where we need to go and to fund that appropriately.
That's a good reminder. Okay, audience questions. Questions for this group? Oh, we've got one up in the back. Oh, there's a mic coming to you, so hold on just a moment. It's important for the recording.
Thank you. Two kind of related questions. One, when we talk about making roadways safer and infrastructure, I'm wondering whether data is being collected to assess the impact of other driver distractions that affect driver performance. We see on our roadways huge digital billboards, for example, some of them changing every 4 seconds, 8 seconds, some of them showing videos. I'm wondering if any of these data collection sources are looking at the effects of driver distraction. And then the second question has to do with privacy and whether we know that data is being sold that's gathered, and traffic safety gathering data may also be getting lots of personal information that's then brokered and sold. How do you address that? Is that something that's coming up as a concern?
I think I'll start. I don't know much about whether or not we're collecting information on billboard distraction as a data point. I can't say that I'm familiar with that. But I do think a lot about the privacy piece of it, and the king in me would love to have access to private data and information that inform human behavior, right? We just don't have any insight in when an individual is going to be behind the wheel of a car and scrolling Instagram, because it happens. But we don't have that information. We don't have access to that information. We're never going to know if somebody is leaving a bar and walking into a car unless they get pulled over and they're tested and found to be under the influence. And so there is this juxtaposition and this trade-off that we have within our society around the right to an individual to privacy, but the huge need for us to address safety is impacted by the fact that we don't have access to that private data, and that's something that we do have to contend with.
Yeah, so to answer the first question precisely, as an example, for instance, so insurance providers do actually have a lot of data from the phone, which is personal data on their side, but then comes like anonymized on our side when we use it. And you can see actually the amount of interaction that people have with their phone or the number of calls. So that specific data, for instance, all states, you can get all this information at an anonymized level. And to answer the second question, so what's happening, so we actually worked with the OMF on the MDS GDPR statement. So as a company, Villanova, we've always been pushing and sort of working with different institutions, data authority in Europe or in the US to for privacy. So what's happening on the data themselves is that generally they truncate the trips and then they rotate the vehicle ID. And so basically, on our side, what we do is that we do like aggregation of events. So essentially, like after the aggregation, it's impossible actually to go back to read identifying the person. And then when we use actually single events or abnormal driving events, actually at the intersection level, those ones have actually been already, like the trips have been truncated and the vehicle ID have been rotated. So that's the way with anonymization or pseudonymization that we answer that question.
So it's a fast. Go ahead, Brian, please.
Because that's a really important point, though, because the data question, data privacy is always a huge thing. But like when you anonymize it and then you aggregate it, like personally, we have no interest in personal data whatsoever. It's not useful to us. We don't really care. What we care about is the safety relevant data that can be used to discover trends. That we can look for dangerous road corridors or other kinds of conditions that we should be informing the city or state about, so they can rectify that in their planning. That's what the data is being used for. So like there's always, I feel like, a disconnect between the data and the actual data that we're talking about, safety-wise.
Fascinating pairing of questions, because the distracted driving, I immediately thought of Volvo. And Volvo is coming out with a product that will monitor the driver as they're driving, and if you start to nod off or get distracted, it will remind you to pay attention. So theoretically, that car now knows when I'm distracted, whether I'm looking at my phone or getting tired or whatever. But what is Volvo doing with that information? I'm assuming that Volvo knows that I'm driving the car, but I'm hoping that Volvo's not passing that along to my insurance company. But that's certainly kind of a question as we get into more and more of this technology being right in our face in our vehicles and other examples, to where it's good. Yes, the car should be making sure I'm paying attention when I'm driving, but then what happens to it after the fact? Okay, other questions? One right up, Mike's coming from up above.
Thank you. My understanding of the thesis of Angie Schmidt's book, Right of Way, is that like a pretty significant portion of pedestrian fatalities are due to these like state-controlled regional roads that go through urban areas and typically go through areas where the population was not politically powerful enough to kind of resist that dangerous infrastructure. So I kind of wonder, I mean, like I personally would love a lot more data, but this seems like a pretty known problem with a like kind of thrown back to the earlier problem of like conservative states versus like more liberal cities and these like highway agencies that kind of don't really care about urban mobility to some degree. I don't know. I'm sorry. This has gone into a rant and less
No, you're okay. And Anna, the Atlanta region's a fascinating microcosm of the country. Are you facing that challenge of the kind of that urban, suburban, exurban kind of dynamic, and how to address something like road safety?
Yeah, I mean, we think about equity when we think about developing roadway safety solutions. I don't know that we've ever thought about it from the sense of the Highway Act of 1954 did implement these national infrastructure interstate highways that disrupted Black and brown communities and the like, and then put highways in the middle of kind of city communities. I don't know that we are examining that as the cause of highway safety issues in Metro Atlanta. I think we're trying to just solve the problem, because the same kinds of issues that we see even in those communities, we're seeing other places in the region where that was not the case, right? And so we don't make that distinction when we're trying to solve for roadway safety. I mean, we try to address those issues as a separate matter because they need to be addressed. But when it comes to roadway safety, I think we're trying really just to grapple with it at a regional level and at a larger scale, sort of lifting up out of those issues. So, I mean, that's just my honest answer.
All right, so I'm an eternal optimist, and so to end this discussion on an optimistic note, I want you to put your futurist hat on, and in a word or two or three, but let's keep it a word. What's the future look like? Professor Ma, can we start with you? Right.
I just want to go back to my data. I'm an engineer, okay?
So wait, that's like 12 words already. But I mean, it's like that's. Keep going.
I'll go first. Data's gonna save us.
Data's gonna save us.
We need more and more data to make better informed decisions.
Okay, more data, more informed decisions. Thibault?
Near term, I believe safe routing, and so safe adapted navigation with alerting, and longer term V2X real-time information and warning for the cars.
Okay.
I think the future looks human. We need to be making decisions based on what is the target impact audience that we're trying to accommodate, right? And if it's not human, it can't be faster speeds, it can't be more efficiency on roads. It has to be, are we doing this for human benefit So hashtag safe.
That's great. And I'm going to say safe, because I think the collective focus on this, we can do this. This is within our ability to address. Just like the airline industry is now held to practically a zero fatality standard, we can do that in road safety. All right, please give my panel here a round of applause for participating.